The pen was in her hand. The acceptance form was on the table. The deadline was in 3 days. And Nkiruka Oselumese had not moved in 47 minutes. The kerosene lamp threw its familiar orange glow across the kitchen table, the same table where she had studied through car cuts and hunger pangs and the particular exhaustion of a person who has been running towards something for so long that she has forgotten what stillness feels like. The same table where she had once spread her chemistry notes like a map of a country she was determined to reach. She had reached it. The letter was right there. Hoffman Adeyemi International Science Foundation, University of Edinburgh. Full merit scholarship. £1,200 a month. The most important document she had ever held in her 22 years of living. And it had arrived in the same week that her world cracked open from the other direction. Outside, a nightjar was calling into the dark. The compound was quiet. Her mother had gone to sleep. And somewhere across the city, in a bloodbed with rails on the sides and a blood pressure monitor beeping its slow, indifferent rhythm, her father was fighting to remember how to speak. The pen did not move. She looked at the form, then at the wall, then at the lamp, then at the form again. Who decides what a daughter's life is worth? She had written that question at the bottom of a page 2 hours ago. She had underlined it. She still had no answer. But you need to understand something before we go any further. You need to understand what was at stake, what she had come from, what it had cost to arrive at this table on this night, holding this pen. Because this is not a simple story about sacrifice. This is a story about what happens when the sky opens and the ground cracks at exactly the same time. But before we go any further, if you have ever stood at a crossroads where every direction cost you something you loved, drop a pound in the comments right now. You are not alone in that feeling, and this story was made for you. And if you are new to this channel, welcome to Stories by Abby, where African stories are told the way they were always meant to be told, fully, honestly, with nothing held back. Hit subscribe. You will want to stay for this one. To understand Nkiruka, you have to understand where she came from. Not just geographically, though Onitsha matters, the way all origin cities matter, stamping themselves into a person's bones. You have to understand the compound. 11 families behind one gate, sharing 2 bathrooms, sharing the noise and the smells and the complicated intimacy of people who did not choose each other, but have learned across years to absorb each other's lives. In that compound, electricity was not a utility, it was a rumor. It came when it felt like it and left without explanation, the way an unreliable relative might disappear mid-conversation. Most nights, it left before 10. Nkiruka had learned to be done with needing it by 10. She was awake every morning at 4, not because someone woke her, not because an alarm demanded it, but because she had calculated, precisely the way she calculated everything, that 4 in the morning was the only hour that belonged entirely to her. Before the compound stirred, before the babies cried and the generators started and the hawkers began calling from the road. 4 in the morning was silence, and silence was the only classroom she could always afford. The kerosene lamp, the red barrel, the dog-eared textbooks with broken spines and pages she had read so many times, the words had begun to feel like old friends rather than information. Molecular structures traced with precision like someone who understood that every detail was the difference between a future and the absence of one. At 22, Nkiruka Oselumese carried a cumulative GPA of 4.87. Her professors at the University of Benin did not know what to do with her, in the best possible way. She made them pause mid-lecture, not to correct her, but because something she had said had opened a door in their own thinking that they hadn't noticed was closed. She was the kind of mind that came along rarely, the kind that made people around her sharper simply by being present. Her mother called it the hand of God moving through a stubborn child. Her father called her sunrise. Tobechukwu Oselumese, Tobe, to everyone who loved him, had once been a man of standing, headmaster of St. Augustine's Primary School for 16 years, a man whose laughter entered a room before he did, like rain filling a dry riverbed, suddenly, completely, with no space left for emptiness. A man who believed genuinely that if you did your work with integrity and patience, life would eventually arrange itself around that integrity like water finding the shape of its container. Then, the school board restructuring of 2009 showed him a different truth. Politics had replaced him with a younger man who had the right connections and none of the right values. At 53, Nkiruka Oselumese had folded his dignity into his pocket and taken it to a roadside kiosk where he sold phone chargers and screen protectors and SIM cards to people who did not know they were buying from a man who used to shape the minds of their children. He never spoke about it. That silence was the thing that broke Nkiruka's heart most consistently. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, the way water breaks stone. He carried his disappointment like old trees carry lightning scars, permanently, visibly, but without theater. Every evening he waited for her, the wooden bench outside their zinc-roofed home, the fading light. And when she came, books pressed to her chest, fatigue pulling at her eyes, the dust of the road on her sandals, he would look at her and say the same 4 words he had said every evening for years. "Nay, tell me what you learned today." And she would sit beside him and tell him everything. Covalent bonds, cellular respiration, the philosophy of the scientific method, the ethical complications of genetic engineering. And Tobe would listen with his whole body inclined toward her, like a tree bending toward light, like her words were the most important thing happening anywhere on earth. It was in those evening sessions that Nkiruka understood something she never found the words to say out loud. Her father had poured every ambition life had stolen from him directly into her, not as weight, as gift. The gift of being trusted to carry a dream that deserved to live somewhere, even if it could no longer live in him. She could not fail him. The thought of it lived in her chest like a stone she carried everywhere she went. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. The harmattan had finally loosened its grip on Onitsha, and the morning air carried the smell of wet soil and something that felt dangerously close to hope, the kind of morning that makes you believe briefly that the universe has been paying attention. Nkiruka found it wedged between a NEPA bill and a church flyer in the small wooden postbox outside the gate. She almost missed it. The Hoffman Adeyemi crest was small, embossed in gold at the upper left corner, the kind of detail that would mean nothing to someone who had spent 8 months waiting for exactly this. Her hands went still. She had applied on the last day of the application window 8 months ago, the university library computer. 4 hours, 500 words to explain why a girl from a zinc-roofed compound in Onitsha deserved to sit in a laboratory at the University of Edinburgh and contribute something meaningful to the world. She had written and deleted and rewritten until her eyes burned, and the librarian had cleared his throat twice to signal closing time. She had told no one, not her mother, who would have lit 3 candles and told every woman in the prayer group, not Ugom Sinachi, who would have screamed loud enough to disturb the entire compound and draw attention to a dream that Nkiruka was not yet ready to speak into existence. 8 months of silence, 8 months of checking her email with trembling fingers on the library computer, 8 months of the particular airless agony of waiting. And now, the envelope was in her hands. Real paper, real ink, real weight. She did not open it immediately. She stood in the compound, the morning still purple around her, a rooster crowing somewhere beyond the fence, a baby beginning its first complaint of the day from the flat above. The smell of egusi and crayfish drifted from a ground floor kitchen. Ordinary life moving forward, indifferent to the magnitude of what she was holding. Nkiruka sat down on the concrete step. She prayed. Not with words. She had no words precise enough for this moment. Just a breathless, internal reaching toward whatever force had been watching over a girl who studied by kerosene light and refused year after year to stop. Then she opened it. Dear Miss Oselumese, it is with great pleasure and the unanimous decision of the selection committee that we offer you the Hoffman Adeyemi Full Merit Scholarship for graduate studies in biochemical research at the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. This scholarship covers full tuition, accommodation, a monthly stipend of £1,200, research funding of up to £8,000, and a return flight ticket. The program commences September 14th, We require your formal acceptance no later than August 1st. The paper shook. Or her hands did. She could no longer tell the difference. She read it 3 times, 4, 5, until the words dissolved into something beyond language, until what she was looking at was not a letter but a door, wide, luminous, standing open in the middle of a field she had been crossing on foot, alone for her entire life. Edinburgh, Scotland, £1,200 a month. She did the conversion without thinking. Over 1 million naira. Monthly, more money than her father had earned in any single year of the last decade. The tears came without warning or dignity. Not the soft kind, the accumulated kind, years of 4 a.m. mornings and dried out highlighters and swallowed pride and borrowed transportation fare, releasing all at once through a girl sitting on a concrete step in a purple morning, pressing her hand over her mouth so the compound would not hear. She was still shaking when her mother's voice cut through from inside. "Nkiruka, come and help me with this gas cylinder. Nkiruka." She wiped her face, folded the letter, pressed it flat against her chest for 1 more second, feeling the paper against her heartbeat, as if she could store the moment inside her body for safekeeping. Then she stood, straightened her spine, went inside. She told no one. Not yet. The universe does not check its calendar before it moves. This is the cruelty of it. Not that bad things happen, but that they happen regardless of timing, regardless of what you are in the middle of, regardless of the fact that you have just received the most important letter of your life and you are begging the universe for just 1 week of stillness to understand what it means. The universe does not negotiate. It was Thursday evening, 48 hours after the envelope. Nkiruka was in the kitchen making ofe onugbu, the bitter leaf soup her father loved, the one that took patience to prepare, the one she only made when she wanted to do something with her hands while her mind worked through something heavy. The oil was hot, the stock was reducing, the kitchen smelled exactly the way home is supposed to smell. Then she heard it. Not a crash, not a scream, something quieter, which was precisely why it was more terrifying than either. A thud, followed by silence. She turned off the stove. She told herself, a chair falling, a book dropped, the ordinary settling sounds of a house at rest. She walked toward the sitting room with the particular deliberateness of someone who already knows what they are about to find and is using the last few steps to prepare their body for it. Tobe was on the floor. The television was still running, the evening news anchor's voice filling the room with headlines about things that no longer mattered. Her father lay on his side, one arm extended at an angle that looked like he had tried to catch himself and missed. His mouth was pulled slightly to the right. His eyes were open, and they were focused on something that was not in that room, something she could not see and could not follow him to. Nkiruka did not scream. Later, days later, this would disturb her, the absence of the scream. She would lie awake wondering what it said about her, that her first instinct was not sound, but action. She would eventually understand. She had not been calm. She had simply converted her terror into function, the way she converted everything that overwhelmed her into something she could do. She dropped to her knees. She took his hand, the hand that had shown her how to hold a pencil, that had wiped her tears, that had tapped the kitchen table in the evenings while she talked about molecular structures, and she said, very quietly, very steadily, "Papa, I'm here. I'm right here." Her mother came out of the bedroom and screamed enough for both of them. What followed was a storm that moved too fast for memory to hold properly. Fragments only. The neighbor's car, the back seat smelling of engine oil and old newspapers, the hospital corridor with its antiseptic smell, and the other smell underneath it, the one that was human and frightened. A doctor with tired eyes delivering words like ischemic and clot and left hemisphere, words from Nkiruka's textbooks, suddenly transformed into sentences about her father. her mother in a plastic chair, hands folded in her lap, rocking in a motion so small and so continuous it looked like prayer made physical. Ugomosinachi arrived at midnight. Nobody had called her. True friends always know. Through every hour of it, the forms, the waiting, the relatives arriving with varying degrees of genuine concern, the prayers whispered in corridors, Nkiruka functioned. She asked the right questions, she tracked the medications and the observation schedules. She translated the doctor's language into something her mother could hold without dropping. She was the person everyone leaned on because she was the one who understood. And understanding in that hospital was the only currency that bought anything. She did not cry again. The tears had gone somewhere interior, somewhere dark and pressurized, somewhere she could not reach them even when she tried. The letter was still in the inner pocket of her bag. She could feel it against her body every time she moved. A constant, terrible presence, a second heartbeat, a question she had not been asked permission to be asked. On the fourth day, her father spoke. It was not the speaking she knew, not the voice that filled rooms, not the voice that said, "Ine, tell me what you learned today," with the ease of a man who had never once doubted that the answer would be worth hearing. These words came out slowly, imprecisely, each one dragged through a passage that had been partially closed, as if his mouth and his mind had woken up in the same body, but were now speaking different languages and working painfully toward translation. The physiotherapist, a calm, brisk woman who had clearly delivered this speech many times before, used phrases like recovery trajectory and long-term rehabilitation and significant support required at home. Nkiruka wrote everything down. She always wrote everything down. But it was at 2 a.m. in the hospital bathroom, sitting on the floor with her back against the cold wall, that she allowed herself to translate those clinical phrases into the language of her actual life. Long-term rehabilitation meant months, possibly a year, possibly longer. It meant daily physiotherapy exercises that required a patient, knowledgeable second pair of hands. It meant speech therapy sessions and someone at home who could continue the practice between appointments. It meant medication schedules that changed as the recovery progressed, and a medical system, overworked, underfunded, stretched across too many patients, that would not advocate for Nkiruka Oselumese unless someone who understood the system did it for him. Her mother would do anything for Tobe. Nkiruka knew this without question. Her mother would walk through fire without complaining. But navigating specialist appointment, identifying the difference between a recovery plateau and a medical emergency, communicating with doctors who use language as a barrier rather than a bridge, these required a specific kind of knowledge. The kind of knowledge that Nkiruka had, the kind of knowledge that Edinburgh had been prepared to take and sharpen into something that could change the world. She sat on that bathroom floor and held both truths at the same time, something she had never had to do before, had never been required to do before. Because before this week, her truths had always been allowed to exist in sequence rather than collision. The scholarship, her father. The door that had opened at the exact moment the ground cracked open beneath it. She thought, if I go, who does this? And she thought, if I stay, what does that cost? Not just me, but every girl who might one day benefit from what I would have become. Neither thought released her. Both held on with equal, merciless force. This, right here, was the impossible. Not a dramatic, cinematic impossible. The quiet, domestic, devastating kind. The kind that lives in hospital bathrooms at 2 a.m., in the space between two equally true and equally costly realities, where no one is watching, and there is no right answer, and the weight of it is entirely yours to carry. It was Ugomosinachi who found her. The door had not been locked. Nkiruka had not even thought to lock it, which was perhaps the truest sign of how thoroughly she had come undone. Ugo pushed it open, took in the scene with one look, her best friend in the bathroom floor, back against the wall, the particular blankness on her face that was not peace but exhaustion, and did not ask a single question. She sat down on the floor beside her, shoulder to shoulder, the two of them against the wall in a hospital bathroom at 2:30 in the morning, the fluorescent light flickering slightly above them, the distant sound of the ward continuing its nighttime rhythm beyond the door. Ugomsinachi Nwachukwu was everything Nkiruka was not externally. Loud where Nkiruka was quiet, expressive and physically generous where Nkiruka was precise and contained. She was the kind of person who cried at advertisements and laughed at funerals, not from insensitivity, but from an excess of feeling that never quite fit inside the available containers. She had been Nkiruka's closest friend since their first year at university, when they had been assigned adjacent seats in an introductory biology lecture, and Ugo leaned over, looked at her already annotated notes, and whispered, "You've been here before, haven't you?" It was not a question. Nkiruka almost smiled. That was the beginning of everything. Ugo had known about the scholarship since that morning. Nkiruka had finally told her, the words coming out flat and strange, evacuated of the joy that they should have carried, like a song played in the wrong key. Ugo had said nothing then. She had only reached over and squeezed her hand once hard and let go. Now she said, "Show me the letter." Nkiruka took it from her bag. Ugo received it with both hands and read it slowly, the way you read something that matters, the way you read something that belongs to someone you love. Then she folded it carefully back along its existing creases and returned it without comment. She sat with it in silence for a full minute. "You already know what everyone is going to say," Ugo said finally. It was not a question. "Yes. Your aunties will say family first. Your mother will say she can manage even when she cannot. The church women will say God will provide. And the men in your family will say it is your duty as the daughter." A pause. "And your father?" Ugo asked carefully. "What would he say?" The question dropped into Nkiruka's chest like a stone into still water. She felt the rings expand outward, slow, inevitable, touching every edge of her. What would he say? She thought about the bench, the fading light, the 4 words repeated over years like a ritual, like a covenant. "Ne, tell me what you learned today." She thought about the way he said her name, Nkiruka, which means the best is yet to come, as if it were not simply what she had been named, but what he had personally staked his belief in. She thought about the morning she came home with her WAEC results, 7 A's, clean, unambiguous, and found him sitting in the dark because the electricity had cut. She had lit a candle. She had held the result slip in the small flame light and shown him. He had taken it from her with both hands and held it at arm's length and read it once, very quietly, in a voice that was barely sound at all. And then, Nkiruka Oselumese, a man she had never seen weep, not once in her entire life, had wept. Not from sadness, from something that had no smaller name than this. "This is why I am alive." She whispered, "He would tell me to go." "I know," Ugo said, "and I cannot go." Ugo did not argue, did not reason, did not offer solutions or silver linings or the particular violence of someone trying to make an impossible thing feel manageable. She simply said, "I know that too." And somehow that, the being known fully, without any attempt to fix it, was the only thing in 4 days that felt like solid ground. The days between the bathroom floor and the 8th day moved the way time moves inside hospitals, not in hours, but in small, significant increments. The first time Tobe tracked movement with his eyes deliberately, the first time his left hand responded to a squeeze with a squeeze in return, the first time the physiotherapist nodded in a way that meant more than expected rather than exactly as expected. Nkiruka was there for all of it. every morning before the doctor's rounds, every evening until the nurses changed shifts and the ward settled into its nighttime quiet. She sat beside his bed and talked to him, not because the doctors had told her, though they had, but because she could not think of another way to be his daughter while he was in there fighting. She talks about chemistry, about Edinburgh's rainfall patterns, which she had looked up on the library computer with a feeling she could not name, about the labours, about the compound, about small, ordinary things that were also in their way a form of saying, the world is still here. You are still needed in it. He listened. Even before he could respond, he listened, his eyes finding her face and staying there, telling her what his language centers had not yet recovered enough to say. On the 8th day, his speech had returned for short, careful sentences, incomplete, sometimes misworded, but unmistakably his. The doctors called it a remarkable progress. Nkiruka called it characteristic. She had never known her father to do anything at less than her full effort. A stroke was not going to change that. It was sitting beside him that afternoon that he looked at her for a long, deliberate moment and said, with the particular effort of someone spending a resource they have in limited supply, "Your bag." She frowned. "My bag?" He lifted his left hand, the functioning one, and gestured, "Bring it." She placed the bag on the bed beside him. He reached into it slowly, navigating by memory and touch rather than efficiency, and found the inner pocket, the same pocket into which he had tucked transportation fare on countless Sundays, knowing she was too proud to ask directly. His hand came out holding the Hoffman Adeyemi letter. Nkiruka stopped breathing. He had not known about it. She was certain, completely certain, that she had never told him, and yet he knew exactly where to reach. He held the letter up. The stroke had disrupted his reading fluency, and English was particularly difficult now, but he stared at the gold-embossed Hoffman Adeyemi crest at the top with an expression she could not fully read. Then he looked at her. Nkiruka. Each syllable was an act of will, extracted from somewhere deep and effortful, but the voice, the tone beneath the effort, was her father's, completely, unmistakably, irreducibly her father's. She was crying before he said another word. "Go," he said. One word, one syllable, one word that cost him everything available to him in that moment, and he spent it without hesitation. "Papa, go." His left hand found hers on the bed. The grip was a fraction of what it had been, the grip that had steadied her first bicycle, that had pressed her diploma into her hands at graduation, that had found her palm on Sundays and left something in it without ceremony or explanation. And yet, something inside that diminished grip was fiercer than anything she had felt in her life. Something ancient and decided and completely sure. "Go. You are my sunrise." A breath. The effort of it visible in every muscle of his face. "You don't stop for the dark." The room dissolved. She held his hand and she wept, not quietly, not with the contained dignity she had maintained for 8 days, but completely, the way a person weeps when the thing they have been holding finally becomes too heavy and too precious to carry alone any longer. And her father held her hand with his weakened grip, and he did not let go. And that grip, that refusal, told her everything the stroke had not yet given him the words to say. That night, she came home to the silence of the compound. Her mother was asleep. She had barely slept in 8 days, and her body had finally overruled her. The generator was off. The street outside had gone quiet in the way that Onitsha only goes quiet very late at night, when even the city needs to breathe. Nkiruka sat down at the kitchen table. The kerosene lamp, the acceptance form blank and waiting, the letter beside it, and the pen in her hand that had not moved for 47 minutes, which is of course exactly where we came in. Outside, the nightjar was calling. She stared at the form. Then she set down the pen, deliberately, gently, as if setting down something she wasn't yet ready to commit to, and she took out a clean sheet of paper instead. She began to write. Not to the foundation, not to anyone outside herself. She wrote a list, the most important list she had ever made, because she had learned, across 22 years of using her mind as her primary tool, that clarity does not come from thinking alone. Clarity comes from making the invisible visible, from pinning the fog to the page. What Papa needs, what Mama cannot do alone, what money can solve, what money cannot solve, what September 14th means, what staying means, what leaving means, what I am not, what I owe, what I am owed. She wrote for 2 hours. She wrote past the point where the lamp began to flicker and she had to adjust the wick. She wrote past the nightjar and past the 2 a.m. call to prayer from the mosque 3 streets over, and past the dog that barked twice in the compound and went quiet. At the bottom of the final page, she wrote one last thing. Who decides what a daughter's life is worth? She underlined it twice. Then she sat with it. She thought about Ezioma, her grandmother, who walked 12 kilometers to school every day in the 1950s because education was the only door that did not require a man's name above it. She thought about Ada Obiageli, her great-aunt, who held her family together through war years with a ferocity of will so complete it had become biological, passing down through the bloodline like a dominant gene. She thought about every brilliant girl on this continent sitting right now in a room lit by something inadequate, a phone screen, a candle, a dying battery, studying towards a future that the world had not yet decided to make easy for her. Girls who would never get this letter, who would never be chosen, who would never see the door open at all. And she thought about her father's hand, the fierce thing living in that diminished grip. She pulled the acceptance form toward her. She picked up the pen. She did not fill in the acceptance form, not that night. Instead, she wrote a different letter, the third most important piece of writing she had ever produced, after the scholarship essay itself and the list she had just completed. She wrote to Hoffman Adeyemi Foundation, not to accept, not to decline, to negotiate. She explained, with the same precise, unsentimental clarity she brought to everything, that her father had suffered an acute ischemic stroke 8 days prior and was currently in inpatient rehabilitation, that she was her family's primary medical liaison and the only member of her household with the educational background to manage the complexity of his recovery, that she was not withdrawing her acceptance, that she was requesting a formal deferral of 1 academic year, citing documented medical emergency with a commitment to full enrollment the following September. She wrote it 3 times before she was satisfied. Then she saved it as a draft. She would send it from the library computer in the morning and set it aside. Then she did something she had not done in 8 days. She called Ugomsinachi. It rang 4 times. Then Ugo's voice, immediately alert in the way of someone who had been waiting rather than sleeping. "Talk to me." "I'm not declining," Nkiruka said. A bit of silence. Then, quietly, "I know. I need 1 year. I need to get Papa stable. I need to find a sustainable structure for Mama, a community health worker, someone trained, someone consistent. I need to use the next year to build something that doesn't collapse the moment I board a plane." And then you go. And then I go. Ugo exhaled, long, slow, the sound of someone who has been holding something and is only now setting it down. "What do you need from me?" "Everything," Nkiruka said. And for the first time in 8 days, something at the corner of her mouth moved in the direction of a smile. The next morning, she sent the letter. The foundation's response came 11 days later. The committee had reviewed her request. Given the documented circumstances and her exceptional academic profile, they were pleased to confirm a 1-year deferral. Her scholarship remained fully intact. Her place at Edinburgh was held. She read the email 3 times. Then she closed the laptop screen, walked out of the library, and stood in the afternoon sun for a long moment with her eyes closed and her face turned upward. Not performing anything for anyone, simply receiving it. The year that followed was the hardest of her life, and she would not have exchanged it. She coordinated Tobe's care with a precision that his medical team noted with something approaching admiration. She found a trained community health worker, a woman named Ngozi, calm and competent and reliable, who came 3 mornings a week. She spent her evenings teaching her mother the practical knowledge she needed: how to identify warning signs, which medications required food, how to speak to doctors without being dismissed. She sat with Tobe every day and did the speech exercises with him, the two of them working through the words with the same patience he had once brought to her in evening lessons. On the bench. "Ne," he said to her one morning in November, clearly, without effort, the word arriving in his voice the way it always had. "Tell me what you learned today." She had to leave the room. She stood in the corridor and pressed her back against the wall and put her hand over her mouth, and she let herself feel all of it, the grief and the love and the strange, complicated gratitude of a year that had cost her something real and given her something she had no name for yet. On September 12th, 2 years after the Tuesday the envelope arrived, Nkiruka Oselumese packed 1 suitcase and 1 carry-on and said goodbye to a compound where 11 families shared 2 bathrooms. Her mother held her for a long time and did not speak. Her father, standing now with a cane, his right side still rebuilding itself month by month, pressed something into her palm as she turned to go. She looked down. A folded piece of paper. She opened it. Inside, in handwriting that was shakier than she remembered, but unmistakably his, the looping, deliberate script of a former headmaster, were 4 words. "Tell me everything, Ne." She boarded the plane. She carried the note in the inner pocket of her bag, the same pocket where the scholarship letter had lived, pressed against her body like a second heartbeat. And somewhere over the Atlantic, at an altitude where Onitsha was no longer visible, even as a concept, Nkiruka Oselumese opened her notebook and began for the first time in her life to write down everything she had learned. Not because she had to, because she finally had somewhere worthy to take it. If this story moved you, if you felt Nkiruka's weight, if you held your breath when Tobe reached into that bag, leave a comment below and tell me, what would you have chosen? This is the conversation that matters. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Stories by Abby, because there are more stories coming.